The Bengals are on a bye, but like I said all week, we are not here on Cincinnati Bengals Talk. So thanks for joining us for another edition in a special edition because we're joined by the voice of the Bengals, Dan Hoard. Make sure you check out my favorite Bengals podcast, the Bengals Booth Podcast. Dan, I appreciate the time. Hopefully you do get a little time to relax, even though people like me are like, hey, you're on a bye. So let me ask you about the Bengals. Regardless, I appreciate the time.
My pleasure, James. Thanks for the invitation. Really not a bye for me. Basketball started this week, so the Bearcats had a game on Monday. They've got one on Thursday. They've got another one on Sunday. The football team plays on Friday. So this is actually a really busy week for me, but I'm not complaining. It's awesome.
So naturally, I bother you during one of the busier weeks of the year. All right, I will make this quick. Let's start with really the entire Bengals first half of the season. First 9 games. They get off to the 0-2 start, fight back, get to over 500. You have the dud on Monday night, but now you look up and they're still 5-4, like they were last year going into the bye. What are your general thoughts about this team through essentially 9 games and in the midway point of the year?
I think we've conveniently forgotten how we felt about 5-4 going into the bye last year because we look back at it now and say, hey, 5-4, the record's the same. They went to the Super Bowl. This is good. But going into that bye last year, they lost to the Jets 2 weeks before the bye. The Mike White game, he throws for more than 400 yards, total debacle. The next week was the Cleveland loss, which was more lopsided than this year's Cleveland loss. Last year was 25 points. This year was 19 points. So going into the bye last year, it felt like the sky was falling. They got off to a great start. Now they're blowing it. The wheels are coming off. They're not going to make the playoffs. And obviously they did. They bounced back after the bye and had a great second half after that. This year, because of the 0-2 start following a Super Bowl appearance with expectations so high, it was really high, or difficult rather, to match those expectations. But thankfully, since 0-2, they've really been one of the better teams in the AFC. I know the Cleveland game was ugly. It happens. Everything went wrong. They played poorly in every aspect of the game, but they bounced back and had their best game of the year. So I actually feel relatively good at 5-4 going into this bye.
Is it unique about at least teams you've been around during your time in this business that they always seem to bounce back? Because they had no defensive backs, right? They had a bunch of different turnover there and the defense bounced back. Every time you count Burrow out, it seems like last year and this year, that's the one major parallel is they respond the right way to adversity. And anytime we doubt them, they respond the right way. Is that pretty unique?
Well, I do think the Joe Burrow factor has a lot to do with that. I think as long as Joe Burrow is the Cincinnati Bengals quarterback, and knock on wood, that's for 15 years, I think that'll always be the case because I think he sets the tempo that he never gets too high, he never gets too low. They're not going to celebrate for more than a night after a big win, and they're not going to throw in the towel for a week or two after a bad performance or a difficult loss. So I credit a lot of that to Joe. Obviously, Zach Taylor as well. So it is unique, but in the Burrow era, I would expect it to continue.
Which is nice to say. Expect it to continue because he certainly expects the bounce back after bad performances. And he's had a couple of them this year and bounced back in a big way in the first half. Let's look at the second half of the season a bit. What's the key to success? We've seen this offense do multiple things. Now they won with Joe Mixon. Certainly Joe Burrow can throw for 500. We've seen that multiple times and once this year, or 400 plus at least. And then defensively, they've been really, really good. And hopefully some reinforcements are coming back, but we know Chidobe Awuzie will not be back. What's the key, you think, to them making another run to the postseason?
Well, the first thing that comes to mind is getting something out of the running game. I don't think they're going to have 241 in a game again. That'd be great if they did. That seems unlikely. But can they be something other than lousy in the running game? And they should be. Joe Mixon didn't get old overnight. He's 4 months older than Joe Burrow. He's still in his prime. I don't care how many times he's carried the ball over the last few years. You watch Joe Mixon in a game or at practice, he is as fresh and frisky as ever. And we saw it against the Carolina Panthers. So can they get something more like 125 or 130 rushing yards per game instead of 90? If they do that, I think the offense will be great because that's going to help the offensive line protect Joe Burrow better. And when they do that, he will pick apart anybody. So that's the first thing that comes to mind. And then on the defensive end, the loss of Chidobe is huge. He's one of the top 5 corners in the NFL. I don't care if he's never been to a Pro Bowl yet. He is a great, great player and an incredible signing by the Bengals prior to last year. So they're not going to be as good. You can't replace that guy. The question is, can the secondary be good enough? Eli Apple is a competent NFL cornerback. I don't say competent as an insult. That's a compliment. It's a very hard position. And I think at least since he's been with Cincinnati, he's been competent. Cam Taylor-Britt's a rookie. It's going to be a roller coaster ride. There will be great games. There will be some head-scratching moments. That's just the way it is at that position. I'm happy they have Mike Hilton back, or it looks like they'll have him back right after the bye. He's the best slot corner in the NFL. But I think Jalen Davis is a pretty good player whenever he's played. And it's mostly been in the preseason. But whenever he's played pretty well. So he's not as good as Mike Hilton. But if Mike has to miss some snaps here and there, I think Jalen Davis will be relatively solid there. So more running game, hold the fort in the secondary, and I think they've got a chance of having a very good final 8 games.
We'll get back to Dan in a second, but first I have to tell you about my bookie, because today's episode brought to you by my bookie. And you're watching sports anyways. You're watching the NFL anyways. If you're watching this channel, you're an NFL fan. So why not make money while you do it with my bookie? They have the greatest and biggest online selection of odds and contests for all of your sports betting needs, whether it's the NFL, whether it's the NCAA. Football season is in full swing. And this week, you get to put your feet up and watch all of the other games and not worry because the Bengals are on a bye. So now's the time to get in on the action. Sign up for free today and use promo code BengalsTalk to claim a deposit match of any amount up to $1,000. So you're going to double that deposit. If you deposit $500, $700, $1,000, you're going to double that deposit with promo code BengalsTalk. Bet anything, anytime, anywhere with my bookie. Be sure to use promo code BengalsTalk. Let's get back to our interview with the voice of the Bengals, Dan Hoard. The offensive line was and has been a hot button topic for quite some time, but certainly was when they made the offseason additions. What would your stock watch be for that unit right now? Obviously, they're flying pretty high after Sunday's win over the Panthers, but how do you feel about them moving forward?
Am I using stock terms?
No, you don't. You do not have to do that.
Okay. I think the interior guys, by and large, have been pretty good. I think Cap has been the best of the 5. I'd probably say Ted Karras has been second and Cordell Volson third. The tackles have struggled. In LC's case, I think it's related to his back. In Jonah's case, I guess that maybe it's related to the kneecap, and that as that gets healthier and he feels better, he'll play better. He's certainly a better player than he's been so far this season. I think his Pro Football Focus grade last year was top 25, right around 25th best tackle in the NFL, something like that. And he's near the bottom this year, and he's given up more sacks than any other tackle in the NFL. I still think he's a solid enough player who will play better in the final 8 games. But in order for the offensive line to be as good as we all thought it would be, the tackles need to play better in the final 8 games. There's just no other way to put it.
How big of a surprise has Cordell Volson been? Because at least for me, I was like, all right, all eyes on 67. And I don't think about him much, which I think is a testament to how he's played so far.
Yeah, I think Cordell Volson's the kind of guy who's going to maximize the talents that he has. He's not the most athletic guy playing guard in the NFL. He never will be. He's a big, strong man with a bone-crushing handshake. That's the kind of guy that he is. And, loves the game, applies himself, basically has attached himself to Ted Karras to try to learn as much about football as he can. So you can win with guys like that. And I think he's bound to get better with more and more reps. So that's been a pleasant surprise, I guess I would say. Whenever you take a 4th-round guy and plug him in there right away, you don't quite know what you're going to get. And by and large, I think he's played well.
One of the reasons when they started 0-2, I think outside of starting 0-2 with really high expectations that people got concerned and worried was because of the second half of the schedule. And you look at it and Pittsburgh might not be very good, but going there is no picnic. Going to Tennessee, you saw how hard that was in the divisional round. And I know it's not the playoffs, but that rounds out November. And then it gets just as tough, whether it's Deshaun Watson and the Browns, Patrick Mahomes and the Chiefs. You got Josh Allen at the start of January. What are your thoughts on the second half schedule? Because I think a lot of people look at it and they make the, oh crap, this schedule's really tough face.
Yeah, and they use words other than that we can't say on this podcast. I look at it this way. I think they need 5 more wins. So you look at those 8 games. Can they win 5 of them to get to the postseason with 10 wins or more? I think so. I think you can pick through those 8 games and say, all right, yeah, they can win that game. They will win this game. They probably won't win that game, but certainly they're capable of winning any of them. The fact that Kansas City and Buffalo are at home, I think, is big because those are the 2 toughest teams of the remaining 8. Baltimore is at home. That's big. Deshaun Watson is at home. That's big. I think when you look back at the first 9 games, it's the Pittsburgh game that's really galling. If they had that game, they'd be tied for first. They would have a divisional win. You'd feel so much differently about the first 9 games if they had just beaten Pittsburgh. And if Joe Burrow's appendix didn't burst the day before the start of training camp, at least in my opinion, they would have beaten Pittsburgh. Of course, if Clark Harris didn't get hurt during that game, they would have beaten Pittsburgh. But the real factor was Joe Burrow. He wasn't himself in week 1. He shouldn't have been himself in week 1. He was, lost 15 pounds and a lot of strength going into training camp. And I think it's probably a safe bet that he'll never throw 4 interceptions in a game again. But it happened. They lost. And that's the one that's galling 9 games into the season.
Yeah, it was the perfect storm. Looking back, I mean, it's pretty obvious, and it's going to be important for them to get that win. I think, yeah, if you could beat Pittsburgh, and I don't want to play the entire schedule game, but if you can beat Pittsburgh in Tennessee, then you're at home for all of these tough games. Maybe you get the Browns back. Maybe you split the Bills and Chiefs, and then suddenly you're right where you want to be. And winning, by the way, on the road against the Patriots, I think that's going to be a tough one too. It's regardless of how they do, I think it's going to be exciting because, it always seems to be interesting with Joe Burrow and company.
And a lot of the stuff that we're saying, James, are things that we said going into the bye last year. Oh, man, going to Denver is going to be tough. Going to Vegas is going to be tough. How do you beat the 49ers or the Chiefs at home? And they didn't win all of those games, but they won enough to get to the final week of the regular season and be able to put their subs in, knowing they had wrapped up the division. So I do think, unless they have an unbelievably great final 8, they're probably playing for the wild card. Because the Ravens have a game in hand. They've got a really easy schedule, and the Bengals are 0-3 in the division. So even if they win their final 3 divisional games, it's still going to be tough to finish ahead of Baltimore, but that's okay. Just get into the playoffs. I know it's tougher to go on the road and win week after week after week, but they did it at Tennessee and Kansas City last year, so they're certainly capable with Joe Burrow at quarterback. So that's kind of where I'm looking at things in the final 8 games of the season. Just get to the postseason tournament, cross your fingers, and hope that Joe Burrow can pull off some magic again.
He's Dan Hoard. Make sure you check him out. Well, really everywhere right now, whether it's Bearcats football and basketball, certainly the Bengals on the Bengals Radio Network and the Bengals Booth podcast. Dan, I appreciate the time. Sorry for bothering you in your busiest week of the year.
No bother, James. Anytime you need me, happy to come on. Keep up the great work. I know Bengals fans appreciate all the stuff that you do.